Night in a hospital smells different from day. During the day, the smells compete: coffee and cologne and the industrial perfume of cleaning products applied by people who have somewhere to be after. At night, they settle. The antiseptic wins. The coffee goes cold and sour. The bodies in the beds become more present, more themselves. The specific human chemistry of a person whose defenses are down and whose body is doing the slow arithmetic of repair or decline. And the smell of that arithmetic, copper and salt, and the faint sweetness of a system under metabolic stress fills a night ward the way nothing else does. I have worked nights for 9 years, not because I prefer them, not because my schedule required it, because nights are when the building empties out and the hierarchy thins, and the work becomes simply the work, a patient and a nurse and the machinery of keeping, and no one watching the ceiling about liability or optics or the correct escalation pathway. Nights are honest. I find honesty easier to work in than the alternative. My name is Lena Marsh. I am 46 years old. I have been a per diem night nurse on the telemetry floor of Crestview Regional Medical Center in Raleigh, North Carolina for 8 months, and I have been banned from this building since 9/17 this morning, when the director of nursing put a suspension letter in my hand in the corridor outside the telemetry station and told me not to return pending a formal review. 2 hours and 11 minutes after that, 12 Special Forces operators arrived at Crestview Regional's main entrance and asked for me by name. This is what happened in between. Crestview Regional smelled the way it always smelled at 2 a.m. The antiseptic winter, the cold coffee, the human arithmetic of the night ward doing its slow work in the rooms I was responsible for. The telemetry floor ran 14 beds on the overnight shift, each one monitored, each one charted every 2 hours. The rhythms of 14 hearts traced in green lines on screens at the nursing station, where I sat and watched and listened and kept the count that the night required. I had been a nurse for 22 years, not all of those years in a hospital, and not all of them in a context where the 14 hearts I was responsible for were the extent of my accountability. I had been responsible for considerably more than 14 hearts in a previous context, in a previous life, and the version of myself that I had put down with careful intention 9 years ago when I separated from the Army and drove east and eventually, after stops that I do not fully account for in professional contexts, arrived in Raleigh. Per diem night shifts were the right fit for the kind of invisible I needed to be. Nobody builds a routine around a per diem night nurse. Nobody learns your schedule well enough to notice your patterns. You arrive, you do the work, you leave before the building wakes up, and the day shift inherits your charts and your counts and the 14 hearts you kept through the night. And they do not particularly wonder who kept them. I had been keeping hearts on the telemetry floor for 8 months, and I had been invisible for all of them. And I had been good at both. The patient in room 7 was the one I was watching at 2:14 a.m. When I first noticed the thing that would, in a sequence of events I was not planning, end my tenure at Crestview Regional. His name was Leonard Pace. He was 71 years old, admitted 3 days earlier with a primary diagnosis of heart failure exacerbation, and his rhythm had been the unremarkable atrial fibrillation that the chart noted as chronic and managed and not a source of concern. I had been watching his rhythm since I took the floor at 11, and I had watched it do what chronic managed atrial fibrillation does, which is persist in its irregular way within the parameters of someone who has been living with it long enough that the body has negotiated a working relationship with the arrhythmia. At 2:14, the negotiation changed, not dramatically. That is the thing about the rhythms I am describing. The reason they are dangerous is that they do not announce themselves with the urgency that triggers immediate response. The change was in the quality of the variability. a subtle shift in the pattern of the irregularity that to someone watching a telemetry screen for the first time looks like the same thing it has always been. And that to someone who has watched enough patterns in enough contexts looks like the thing that comes before the thing. I had watched enough patterns. I went to room 7. Leonard Pace was awake. The specific awake of a person whose body has been doing something in their sleep that has not let them stay asleep. Awake without knowing quite why, the discomfort present but not localized. I introduced myself, took his hand, felt his radial pulse. The quality of it, not the number, because the number was on the monitor and the quality was only in the fingers. I asked him 3 questions. His answers, in the content and in the specific way the words came, slightly effortful, slightly slow, told me something the monitor had not told me yet. I charted the assessment. I charted the rhythm observation. I called the on-call physician. The on-call physician was Dr. Robert Yuen, who was 29 years old and 8 months into his first year of residency, and who was, at 2:22 a.m., somewhere between asleep and not asleep in the on-call room. He answered on the 4th ring. I gave him the assessment in the compressed factual format I used: telemetry patient, room 7, rhythm change, clinical presentation, what I was watching for and why. He listened. He was quiet for a moment. The rhythm's within his charted parameters, he said. Chronic AFib. He's been on rate control for 3 years. What's your clinical concern specifically? I told him specifically. The quality of the variability, the character of the pulse, the patient's specific word choices when I asked about his comfort level. Those aren't objective findings, Doctor, Yuen said. He was not dismissive. He was a conscientious resident parsing the difference between what could be documented and what I was describing. I can't escalate to the attending based on a subjective read of word choices. I understand, I said. I'm asking you to come look at him. A pause. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He was there in 11, which told me he had heard something in the call that his articulated response had not confirmed. He examined Mr. Pace. He reviewed the telemetry. He ordered a repeat EKG, which I had anticipated and had already requested from the tech. The EKG showed something. Not dramatic. Not the acute dramatic finding that activates a code team, the subtle finding that the experienced eye reads as a developing situation requiring close monitoring and a low threshold for escalation. Doctor, Yuen looked at it for a long moment. I'm going to call the attending, he said. Yes, I said. The attending was Dr. Patricia Okafor, the cardiologist on call. She arrived at 3:40, and she looked at Leonard Pace, and she looked at the AG, and she looked at the telemetry record I had been keeping, and she said, with the specific brevity of a physician who has identified something and is moving toward it, "Good catch." She escalated his level of care. She transferred him to the cardiac unit at 4:15. At 5:03, the cardiac unit called the telemetry floor to say that Mr. Pace had gone into a sustained arrhythmia that the transfer had positioned them to manage immediately, and that the timing of the escalation had been, this was the phrase the cardiac unit charge nurse used, the difference. I charted the resolution. I finished my shift. I gave handoff at 7 a.m. And I went home. I came back at 10 p.m. for my next shift. The suspension letter was waiting for me at 9:17 the following morning. I had not gone home at 7. I had stayed, which I sometimes did when the floor was short and the day shift needed coverage, and I had been working straight through. 17 hours by the time the director of nursing, Miss Claire Hedges, found me in the corridor outside the telemetry station, and handed me the letter with the expression of a person implementing a decision they did not make and are not entirely comfortable delivering. The letter cited 3 things. The first was that I had initiated a physician call at 2:22 a.m. for a patient whose charted condition did not meet the objective criteria for an escalation call, and that this pattern, this was the word that stopped me, pattern, which meant this was not the first time this had been noted, of subjective escalation outside objective parameters had been flagged by 2 attending physicians over my 8 months at Crestview. The second was a documentation issue from 6 weeks earlier, a chart entry I had made that had used clinical terminology above the scope, typically associated with a per diem night nurse, which had prompted a question from the medical records review team about my credentials, and specifically about the context in which I had developed the clinical knowledge the note reflected. The third was a complaint from a day shift attending, Dr. Marcus Webb, who had reviewed my overnight notes on 3 separate occasions and had escalated a concern to the director of nursing that my assessments reflected a clinical sophistication that was inconsistent with my role, and that the inconsistency created a liability concern for the department. I read the letter twice. I thought about Leonard Pace in the cardiac unit, whose sustained arrhythmia was being managed by people who had been positioned to manage it because a per diem night nurse had called a resident at 2:22 a.m. I thought about the word pattern. I thought about 22 years and what patterns develop in 22 years and what it costs to be too visible about the patterns. And I thought about the fact that I had been in Raleigh for 9 years and had been careful and had been invisible, and had done the work at the ceiling assigned to the role, and, apparently, I had not been invisible enough. Miss Hedges was still holding the letter out to me. I took it. I read it. I looked at her. "Is there a process," I said, "for responding to the clinical record concerns?" "There will be a formal review," she said. She had the expression of a person who respects the question and cannot do anything about the answer. "In the meantime, pending the review, you're asked not to enter the clinical areas. Mr. Pace is receiving excellent care in the cardiac unit." Her voice was gentle and precise. "Miss Marsh, please take the day." I folded the letter. I put it in the left pocket of my scrubs. I said, "All right." I went to the locker room. I changed out of my scrubs. I sat on the bench in the locker room for a moment, my street clothes on, the suspension letter in my jacket pocket, the specific tiredness of a 17-hour shift compounded by the specific tiredness of a situation I had been careful for 9 years to avoid. I was not angry. I want to be accurate about that. I was tired in a way that had more history to it than a single shift, and I was sitting on a bench in a hospital locker room in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was trying to calculate the distance between where I was and where the version of me that could help people like Leonard Pace without being suspended for it had gone. I had put her down in 2015. I had put her down deliberately and with good reason. Reasons I had examined in the 9 years since from multiple angles and had continued to find sound. And she had stayed down, and I had been Lena Marsh, per diem night nurse, and the work had been enough. The work had been good work. Leonard Pace was in the cardiac unit. But I was sitting on this bench. I got up. I went to the main exit. I stepped out into the September morning air of Raleigh, North Carolina, which was still cool at 9:23 a.m. In the way that September in the Piedmont is cool in the early morning, before the day decides what it is going to be. I sat on the low wall outside the main entrance. I had nowhere specific to be. I thought about calling a cab. I thought about the walk to the bus stop. I thought about the suspension letter and the formal review and the word pattern and what the formal review was going to find when it looked at the clinical knowledge underlying the pattern. I was still sitting on the wall at 11:28 when I heard the vehicles. Not rotorcraft this time. Ground vehicles. The specific sound of military vehicles moving with purpose through urban traffic. The engine register different from civilian SUVs, the weight of them audible in the way they took the speed bump at the parking lot entrance. 3 vehicles. Moving together. Not in a hurry in the way that fear hurries, in a hurry in the way that a deadline hurries, purposeful, directed, aware of a specific time constraint. They came into the parking lot, and they parked in the 3 spaces nearest the entrance, diagonal, not pulling through, which is how you park when you expect to leave quickly in a direction you are not yet certain of. The doors opened. 12 of them, some in uniform, some in civilian clothes that fit the way civilian clothes fit on people whose bodies have been built for a different kind of clothing. Slightly wrong in the shoulders, slightly abbreviated in the movement, the specific tell of people who are not in their natural context. They moved across the parking lot with the coordinated unhurry I knew, each person aware of the other's positions without looking. The grammar of a unit that has moved together in enough spaces that the movement has become collective. The one at the front I would have known in any context, in any clothing, at any distance. Sergeant Major Delia Ferrara. 50 years old, the first woman to complete the Special Forces assessment and selection in my cohort year, and the last person on Earth I had expected to walk into a hospital parking lot in Raleigh, while I was sitting on a wall with a suspension letter in my pocket. She saw me before she reached the entrance. She was scanning. She was always scanning. It was as involuntary as breathing, and her scan found me on the wall, and she changed direction without breaking stride, the specific economical course correction of a person for whom changing direction is not a disruption, but a recalculation. She stopped in front of me. She looked at my street clothes. She looked at the hospital behind me. She looked at the letter-shaped rectangle visible through the fabric of my jacket pocket. "Lena," she said. "Delia," I said. "You're outside," she said. "I am," I said. She had the patience she had always had, the patience that was not a personality trait but a trained capacity, a willingness to let situations develop toward their necessary information rather than forcing them. She looked at the hospital. She looked at me. She made a calculation. "We have a critical," she said. "Blast injury, internal hemorrhage. Their medic worked the field. Needs surgical escalation. The trauma team in this building is already managing a 3-car accident from 20 minutes ago. We were told surgical capacity was limited, and they're asking for per diem support." She paused. "The unit's records flagged this hospital. Your name came up in the per diem registry." She looked at the pocket with the letter. "The registry might be slightly out of date," I said. "It might be," she said. She did not ask about the letter. She knew what the letter was. Delia Ferrara had been in enough institutional situations to know what a letter in a pocket meant, and she was making a decision about the letter and the registry and the situation inside the building. "Can you work?" she said. "I can always work," I said. Something moved in her expression. Not surprise. Delia Ferrara had the same relationship to surprise that Calvin Darren had, the relationship of someone who has trained the acute version out of their responses. But the thing that lived where surprise had been, which was a kind of recognition, a finding of something that matched a known pattern. "Then come inside," she said. I got off the wall. The inside of Crestview Regional at 11:30 on a Thursday morning was not the inside of Crestview Regional at 2 a.m., and the difference was everything. The day shift was fully deployed. The administrative staff was present. The corridor between the entrance and the trauma bay had the specific organized density of a hospital at functional capacity, which meant there were people everywhere, and most of them had opinions about the appropriate channels for every type of request. Miss Hedges was in that corridor. She saw me coming through the entrance with 12 Special Forces operators and Delia Ferrara, and she had the expression of a person watching a situation that her training has not prepared her to categorize. She looked at my street clothes. She looked at the suspension letter she knew was in my pocket. She looked at Delia Ferrara, who was wearing civilian clothes that did not fully contain her, and who was moving with the coordinated unhurry that does not have a civilian equivalent. "Miss Marsh, Miss," Hedges said. "The terms of the suspension, ma'am." Delia Ferrara stopped walking. She looked at Miss Hedges with the complete and efficient attention she brought to every human obstacle. "We have a critical surgical case. I need your best available per diem support." "The registry indicates Miss Marsh." She paused. "I'm asking for her specifically." Miss Hedges looked at me. She looked at the 12 operators. She looked at Delia. "The formal review process needs to happen," Delia said, without inflection. "After, what's your trauma bay status?" Miss Hedges was a competent administrator. She was also, at this moment, in a hallway with a woman who had the specific gravity of someone accustomed to being the final word in situations considerably more consequential than a hospital corridor. The competent administrator and the specific gravity had a brief negotiation, and the specific gravity was patient about it. And then Miss Hedges said, "Bay 2 is available." "Thank you," Delia said. She looked at me. We kept walking. The patient was Staff Sergeant Yemi Obi, 31 years old, right side blast injury with hepatic involvement. The field ultrasound showed free fluid in the perihepatic space. Morrison's pouch filling, the kind of finding that has a specific relationship with time. The unit's medic, a man named Sergeant First Class Kofi Asante, had controlled the external injuries, placed access, given blood products, managed the airway. He had done everything that field medicine could do, and he had done it well, and he was at the edge of what field medicine could do. He gave me the handoff in the compressed factual format. Mechanism, timeline, interventions, response, current parameters. 91 words. I listened to all 91, and I was already moving by the time the last one landed. The trauma attending on duty was Dr. Carmen Reyes, whom I had not worked with before. A day shift attending. The per diem night nurse, and the day shift attending not occupying the same temporal space during normal operations. She was in Bay 2 when I arrived, and she had the specific focused state of a physician who has assessed a situation and is deciding who she has and what she can do with them. She looked at me. She looked at my street clothes. She looked at Asante's handoff continuing in the background. "Who are you?" she said. Directly. The directness of a physician who does not have time for indirect. "Per diem night nurse," I said. "Lena Marsh. 22 years, the last 9 on telemetry, and the first 13 in contexts that are relevant to this situation." She looked at me for 2 seconds. "What contexts?" "Army. Medical. 13 years. 3 deployments. The specific kind of deployment that produces familiarity with blast injury and hepatic trauma." "1 more second. Scrub in," she said. I scrubbed in. What happened in Bay 2 over the next 47 minutes I will give you in its essential shape rather than its full detail. Because the full detail belongs to Dr. Reyes, who was excellent, and to Asante, who had built the bridge that the 47 minutes crossed, and to Yemi Obi, 31 years old, who had what it took and used all of it. The hepatic injury was a grade 3 laceration with ongoing arterial bleeding that the perihepatic tamponade effect had been partially containing, and that was going to stop being contained if we did not give it a reason to stop sooner. Dr. Reyes identified the source in the first 9 minutes and made a decision about approach that I agreed with completely and did not say so, because the field was not the place for that conversation. I had worked in enough similar contexts that the context itself was not a variable. The specific focused present tense quality that certain kinds of work produces, where the field narrows to exactly what needs doing and everything outside the field becomes irrelevant, was familiar to me the way a frequency is familiar to a tuning fork. I kept the field. I managed the access. I anticipated and I adapted, and when Dr. Reyes moved in a direction I had not expected, I moved with her. And when she looked at me twice during the procedure with the expression of a physician reassessing a variable, I held her gaze and kept working. At 12:17, the bleeding was controlled. At 12:31, Obi was stable enough for the OR for definitive repair, and the surgical team that Miss Hedges had mobilized while we were working in Bay 2 was ready to receive him. Dr. Reyes stepped back. She looked at me. She had the expression of a physician at the end of a case that has gone correctly, the specific clean satisfaction of a problem met by the capability required to solve it. 13 years, she said. The first 6 as a combat medic, I said. The last 7 as the medical specialist on a special forces team. 18 Delta. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the doorway, where Delia Ferrara was standing, and where, behind Delia, the 11 other operators were arranged in the corridor in the specific way that people who have been trained to wait well, wait, present, ready, not taking up more space than they require. The suspension, Dr. Reyes said, is a legitimate process, I said. The concerns it's based on are real concerns. I've been practicing above my documented ceiling, and the institution has a right to understand the basis for that. The basis, she said, is standing in front of me. Yes, she looked at the corridor. She looked at me. The formal review is going to find something that changes its conclusions, she said. It's going to find my separation documents and my training record and my deployment history, I said. It was going to find them eventually. I've needed time to be ready for what comes after they find them. She looked at me with the specific attention of a physician who has shifted from clinical assessment to something adjacent to it. The attention that recognizes that a person is managing something that has nothing to do with the work and everything to do with why they needed to be careful about the work. Are you ready now? She said. I thought about the bench outside the main entrance. I thought about 9 years of night shifts and per diem positions, and the careful performance of a ceiling that was not my ceiling. I thought about Leonard Pace in the cardiac unit, whose sustained arrhythmia had been managed because a pattern was noticed, and about Yemi Obi, 31 years old, whose hepatic bleeding had been controlled because a specific kind of experience had been present when it was needed. I thought about Delia Ferrara in the corridor and the 12 operators, and the way she had found me on the wall outside the entrance and had asked one question. Can you work? And had not asked about the letter, because the letter and the work were 2 different things, and she knew which one mattered right now. Getting there, I said. Doctor. Reyes looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded, the small, precise nod of a physician who has received an accurate answer and is accepting it. The review board meets Thursdays, she said. I'll be there. I found Asante in the corridor outside the bay at 12:50. He was sitting against the wall with his legs extended and his eyes open, which was different from the medics who sat with their eyes closed. Asante was watching the corridor, watching the movement, unable to quite release the forward attention that had been sustaining him for the duration. I sat beside him. He's in the OR, I said. I know, he had heard. How long? 2, maybe 3 hours. Reyes is good. He nodded. He was quiet for a moment. I've been running your protocols, he said. The hemorrhage management sequence. The perihepatic packing protocol specifically. He looked at his hands. Today, that's the protocol I used in the field. I looked at my own hands in my lap. Did it hold? It held long enough to get here. He paused. I was taught that protocol by a master sergeant who said it came from a 18 Delta on a Special Forces team who'd written it after a deployment where the standard protocol wasn't adequate. He looked at me. She didn't say a name. No, I said. She wouldn't have. He looked at me. He had the look of someone completing a connection between a thing he had been taught and the person who had generated it, and the completion of that connection changing the weight of what he had been carrying in transit. It was you, he said. A long time ago, I said. It was today, he said. Whatever you wrote then, it was today. I did not have an answer for that was better than the truth of it, so I sat with the truth of it in the corridor outside Bay 2 in Crestview Regional Medical Center in Raleigh, North Carolina, on a Thursday morning in September, wearing street clothes and a jacket pocket with a suspension letter in it. And I let the truth of it be what it was. Miss Hedges found me at 1:15. She had the expression of a person who has been doing administrative and institutional triage simultaneously for 2 hours and has arrived at a resolution that she intends to implement with care. The formal review is Thursday, she said. Dr. Reyes has indicated she'll attend. Dr. Okafor from the cardiac unit has also indicated she'll attend. A pause. She called this morning, after she heard about the suspension. She used the phrase, a clear clinical picture, when she asked to be included. I thought about Dr. Okafor arriving at 3:40 in the morning and saying, "Good catch." The review will find what it finds, I said. Yes, miss. Hedges paused. In the interim, the per diem registry. Your status. I understand it's suspended. It was suspended, she said carefully, pending a review that had not yet had access to your full credential file. Dr. Reyes has requested that file be expedited. She looked at her tablet. Some of what's in it requires specific clearance to view in full, which, she looked up. I've never seen that before. No, I said. You probably haven't. She studied me with the expression of a person updating a file that is significantly larger than she had estimated. The night shift tonight, she said, is short. If you wanted, the per diem night coordinator would be able to make. I'll be here at 11, I said. She nodded. She started to say something else, and then decided the something else could wait, which was the right decision, and she went back toward the administrative wing. Delia Ferrara had been standing at the corridor intersection, and she had heard enough. She came to stand beside me. We stood in the hallway for a moment. The specific silence of a building at midday. Not the night silence, not the operational silence, but the functional hum of a place doing its work, the machinery of keeping running its arithmetic in the rooms around us. 9 years, she said. 9 years. You could have come back earlier. I know, I said. You weren't ready. I wasn't ready. She was quiet. Delia Ferrara did not press what was not ready to be pressed. It was one of the qualities that had made her effective in the field, and effective in the corridor outside Bay 2, and effective in the parking lot when she found me sitting on a wall. She received the answer that was given, and let the rest wait. Obi's going to make it, she said. Yes, I said. Asante's protocol held for 43 minutes in the field, she said. The packing sequence specifically. He said it was yours. I wrote it in 2013, I said. After Kunar. The standard sequence wasn't addressing the hepatic cases we were seeing. The penetrating blast mechanism was creating a presentation the protocol wasn't built for. You rewrote it, she said. I noted the gaps, I said. I wrote a supplement. Someone else formalized it. Everyone who's used that supplement in the last 12 years is walking around, she said. Some of them are standing in this building. I looked at the corridor. The 11 operators had distributed themselves in the waiting area near the OR suite, in the specific patient readiness of people who know how to wait and are waiting for the right information before they do anything else. Some of them I recognized. Some I did not. All of them had the look, the quality, the specific human signature of people who have been somewhere difficult and have arrived somewhere where the difficult is being managed and are in the held breath between. I had been in that held breath many times. On both sides of it. Lena, Delia said. Yeah, it's time. I looked at the window at the end of the corridor. The September afternoon light coming in flat and warm. The specific light of a Thursday in Raleigh that had not known, when it started, what kind of day it was going to be. I know, I said. At 3:46, the OR called the surgical waiting area to report that Staff Sergeant Yemi Obi was out of surgery, stable, in recovery, and expected to make a full recovery given continued monitoring and standard post-operative care. The 11 operators in the waiting area received this information with a specific collective exhale that groups of trained people make when a thing they have been holding is allowed to be set down, not noisy, not dramatic. The sound of 11 bodies releasing something simultaneously that they had been carrying since the morning. Delia Ferrara, standing beside me in the waiting area, allowed herself one long, slow breath through the nose. I allowed myself the same. The formal acknowledgement came at 4:02, and it was Delia who arranged it the way Delia arranged things, without announcement, without ceremony beyond what the moment required, which was 12 operators in the waiting area corridor of Crestview Regional Medical Center in Raleigh, North Carolina, at 4 in the afternoon. She looked at me. She brought her hand up. 11 hands followed, not in 2 formal rows, in the specific natural formation of people standing where they had been standing. Some by the chairs, some by the window, some near the OR corridor doors, each one stopping whatever they were doing and bringing the hand up from exactly where they were. And the lack of uniformity in the physical arrangement made the uniformity of the gesture more striking, not less. The sound of it was different from the formal silence of the June Ito corridor, different from the simultaneous click of the gear in the trauma bay. It was the sound of people doing the same thing from different positions. The slight offset of 12 individual decisions arriving at the same place, and it was the most disorganized and human version of this I had ever been on the receiving end of. And for that reason I stood in the waiting area corridor and I straightened, not tall, not dramatic, just aligned, the thing that had been held at a careful angle for 9 years allowed to be what it was. And I returned it. Leonard Pace, in the cardiac unit on the floor above, was recovering from a managed arrhythmia because a pattern had been noticed at 2:14 a.m. by a per diem night nurse who had been keeping hearts on the telemetry floor for 8 months without anyone understanding what she knew about keeping things alive. Yemi Obi, in the recovery room down the hall, was breathing in the steady rhythm of a person who had arrived at the other side of a surgery that had had an adequate answer for what it found. The suspension letter was still in my jacket pocket. Thursday was the review board. Dr. Reyes and Dr. Okafor would be there. The file would be opened. What was in it would be seen. I had needed 9 years to be ready for what came after it was seen. I thought, nearly ready. Getting there. I was still here. Still whole. If Lena's story stayed with you, if you've ever kept the count correct in a room that didn't know what you were keeping, hit the like button and share this with someone who needs it today. Subscribe to the channel. We find the ones working the night shifts, the ones nobody thought to look at twice. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see every single one.